All right, let's dive right in. Today we're going to peel back the layers on a really charged topic, the actual economic impact of non-citizens here in the US. We're going to push past the headlines and the talking points. Instead, we're going to follow the actual money and just let the data do the talking. Let's get to it.
And this question, right here, it really cuts to the core of it all, doesn't it? It's all about fairness. That feeling, that sense that maybe things aren't fair, that's a huge driver in the whole immigration debate. It's a powerful emotion. But, feelings are one thing, data is another. So is that perception accurate? Let's see what the numbers actually tell us.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll tackle that core question of fairness. Then we'll pit perception against the hard numbers. After that, we'll look at their role in the whole economy, run a pretty wild what-if scenario, and then figure out why what people think is so different from what the data shows. And that'll lead us to the final choice.
So, first things first. Let's just state the common perception out loud, right? For a lot of folks, the whole conversation starts and, honestly, kind of ends right here, with the idea that non-citizens, especially undocumented immigrants, are just a financial drain on the country.
And look, this isn't some fringe belief. It's a really powerful narrative that's been shaping politics and how people feel for a long, long time. But the big question we're asking today is, well, it's pretty simple. Does that story actually hold up when you look at the real dollars and cents?
Okay, so let's do it. Let's follow the money. We're going to look at this like a basic balance sheet. What comes in and what goes out, what non-citizens get in public benefits versus what they pay in taxes. And I think you might be surprised by what we find.
And bam, right out of the gate, the data shows something pretty striking. Non-citizens, they're about 7% of the total US population. But look at this. They only account for 3.5% of welfare spending. So right away, we see they're using these benefits at literally half the rate you'd expect based on their numbers.
Okay, so that's the out column. Let's flip over to the in column, what they contribute. And this is incredible. In just 1 year, 2022, undocumented workers, and yeah, for these next few slides, we're zeroing in on just this group. They paid over $96 billion in taxes. Now let's break that huge number down, because where that money ends up is the real key to understanding this whole thing.
First up, check this out, almost $26 billion. That's how much went straight into the Social Security Trust Fund. We're talking billions of dollars propping up the single most important retirement system in America, all from the payroll taxes of this group. And that's not all. Add another $6.4 billion that went directly into Medicare. I mean, that's a massive cash injection into the healthcare safety net for America's seniors. Again, all from their payroll taxes. So here's where it gets really mind-bending. This is the big disconnect. They're pumping billions and billions of dollars into Social Security and Medicare, but as you can see here, they are completely ineligible to get almost any of those federal benefits back. They can't claim Social Security when they retire, they can't get Medicare, they are funding a system that they themselves are locked out of. So, when you add it all up, the taxes they pay on one side and the benefits they get on the other, what's the final number? What's the bottom line? Well, economists call this the net fiscal impact. And the data is crystal clear. It's a huge positive. Even after you account for the local services they do use, like schools or emergency rooms, undocumented immigrants put about $60 billion more into the system every year than they take out. A $60 billion surplus.
But, this whole story is so much bigger than just taxes and benefits. Their real impact is woven into the very fabric of the U.S. economy. They're a huge part of its backbone. Let me show you what I mean.
Just look at this number, $550 billion. That's the amount of economic activity of pure value that undocumented workers alone add to the U.S. GDP every single year. Just let that sink in. This isn't just tax money. This is the value of the work they do, the things they produce, the services they provide.
And if you're trying to wrap your head around how big that number is, think about it this way. $550 billion is about the same as the entire economic output of the state of Pennsylvania for a whole year. So yeah, we're not talking about a rounding error here. We're talking about an economic engine the size of a massive U.S. state.
So where does all that economic power come from? Well, this slide gives you a pretty clear picture. Let's just take agriculture. An incredible half of the entire workforce is undocumented. You add in legal non-citizens, and you're talking about 60% of the hands that get food from the fields to your dinner table. That has a direct impact on whether your favorite fruits and vegetables are even available and how much they cost.
And it's not just farming. Look at construction. It's a very similar story. Roughly 1 out of every 4 people working in construction in the US is a non-citizen. That's the labor that builds our houses, our offices, our roads. And not, of course, has a huge effect on how much a house costs and whether there are even enough to go around. I mean, they are quite literally building the country.
Okay, so you see how deeply they're integrated into these huge parts of the economy. Which leads to a really interesting thought experiment. What if they just vanished? What would actually happen? Well, the reports we looked at ran the numbers on this exact what-if scenario, and the results are, well, they're pretty stunning. So, imagine this. 5 million undocumented workers suddenly leave the workforce. The economic models show an immediate shockwave. First, the entire US GDP would shrink by 2.6%. Then, the price of basics, like your groceries and your housing, would spike. And on top of all that, the government would lose up to $90 billion a year in tax money. It's like a domino effect with really, really serious consequences. And if you think that's bad, the long-term picture is even wilder. One model from the Center for American Progress projects a $4.7 trillion hit to US GDP over just 10 years. Yeah, that's trillion with a T, an absolutely staggering number. Which, of course, brings us back to the big puzzle, right? If all the data we're seeing points to a massive net benefit, both economically and for the government's budget, why do so many people still believe they're a drain on the system? Why is there such a disconnect?
Well, this slide right here really gets to the heart of it. It's all about a mismatch in visibility. Think about it. The costs are local. They're tangible. You see them in your community. At the local school, the emergency room, maybe a shelter, they're right there in front of you. But the benefits, they're huge, but they're also kind of invisible. The billions going into a giant federal fund like Social Security, the overall boost to the national GDP, you don't see that on your way to work. And that gap between what's visible and what's invisible is where the perception problem lives.
So once you understand that dynamic, you can start to reframe the whole conversation. The old line, "they drain our resources," suddenly looks more like, wow, they help fund our schools and our parents' retirement. The fear that they take our jobs becomes, they fill jobs that help keep our food affordable. And that old claim, they don't pay taxes, well, that's just completely flipped on its head when you realize they're paying billions into systems they'll never get to use.
So, when you step back and look at all this data together, it stops being about just numbers and starts presenting a really fundamental choice. A choice about what kind of future the country wants to build.
And ultimately, this is the question that data forces us to ask. Maybe the real choice isn't citizens versus non-citizens. Maybe the choice is actually between two different versions of America. One that's smaller and more expensive for everybody, or one that's stronger and more dynamic because it recognizes the contributions of everyone living here. It's a powerful idea to chew on, for sure.